If we take seriously the fact that to engage in critical political practices in whatever moment we inhabit is, is to embrace the humility of what it means to be part of a historical legacy, right? Then I think it helps us take even more seriously and urgently the fact that it is not only a logical consequence to be an abolitionist, but it's an ethical and historical obligation to be an abolitionist. That if there is such a thing as standing on the shoulders of history and ancestors and guiding one's own political and biological descendants, that abolition becomes a necessary ethical obligation. And to not engage in some attempt at that practice is actually unethical, right? That if you that if you are to be judged by history, then it's to say that you have to embrace that obligation, that ethical obligation. So, in the current moment, I think we can see that what is unfolding is the fact that to engage and embrace in what we call in abolitionist politics, it means at bare minimum two things. One is extraordinarily vigorous debate and argument over who and what inhabit an abolitionist position, right? Meaning it's a question of whether there's such a thing as people who are more inclined to be able to inhabit abolitionism, and on the other hand, what the politics of abolition, right, what the thought and practices of abolition actually look like in this day and time. There's of course a language around people who are most vulnerable should be the ones to guide and lead an abolitionist position. The reason why we should have healthy suspicion of that is that it presumes a definitive sense of vulnerability, right? If we understand that there are logics of vulnerability that focus on particular people, categories of people all the time, black people, right? Colonized people, people considered to be gender non-normative, right? We can understand those lines of vulnerability all the time, but within those lines of vulnerability, there's complexity as well, right? So this is the other side of the argument. This is to push back against the argument as well as of those who would say we're all vulnerable, because we know we're not. Right? I'd love to have white people problems all the time, right? I struggle to have white people problems. That means I have all kinds of good stuff going on. I don't have to worry about rent and food. So if we have a complex understanding of what it means to be vulnerable and what it means to be doing the work alongside and in identification and intimacy with positions of vulnerability, including long historical structured vulnerability to these systems, that to me is the starting point for abolitionist practice. In the immediate sense of what does an abolitionist practice look like right now, I think what I'm going to continue to argue for the near future, most likely, is that it's in large part a challenge of political culture and political pedagogy. Meaning that this is about language, it's about how we think and how we teach, it's about taking the cultural dimension seriously and understanding that the counter warfare against domestic war, against racist and gender domestic war, against proto-genocidal domestic war is in significant part a cultural problem. And the reason I say that is this. I've seen so many rooms of people who bombard audiences. I mean, I'm talking audiences K through 12 students to elders. Bombard audiences with all kinds of statistics and empirical evidence that demonstrates that the only real position that one can inhabit right now is at the bare minimum a complete overhaul of the way policing and incarceration and so-called criminal justice work, right? And this is folks who will show evidence about so-called disparities and asymmetries across lines of race, gender, class, and all the rest of it. It is very often not in the least convincing, right? Especially for folks in the room who believe that there need to be prisons and policing, that there need to be lots of people locked up, lots of black people locked up, lots of brown people locked up, that there need to be tons of cops on the street doing their dirt, even with the periodic scandals of violence against their cousin and their uncle who got killed. Even with that, the statistics, the empirical evidence don't necessarily convince people of anything. right? Which means that there's a whole dimension that we need to articulate, which is the cultural dimension. We need to have stories to tell, ways to retell a historical story, another way to narrate what is true and what is not true, and ultimately, it's about a way to tell a story of humanity, of living as human being that draws from the very existence of those who are deemed to be other than human, right? Meaning those who are designated under the structures of gendered racist criminalization as being other than human. That's the position. That's the position that actually demonstrates the possibility for something other than the current condition of mankind that we're kind of coerced to live under.